Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Iowa City People for Justice in Palestine to tonight's special program, Minnesota Break the Bonds and the Campaign to Divest from the State of Israel. Before beginning tonight's program, let me make a few announcements. First, our group, PJP, normally meets on the first and third Tuesdays of every month at the Megabytes Middle Eastern Restaurant on South Gilbert Street in Iowa City. There is a sign-up sheet on our listserv and free literature located at the tables at the back. We would also like to let you know that there are many avenues of internet activism available to those who have limited time to attend meetings. People interested in petitioning Congress, pursuing divestment and boycott initiatives, or protesting settlement expansion and other human rights violations can check out, among many others, the website of the U.S. Campaign to End the Israeli Occupation. See any member of our group for more details. On Monday, April 16th, we will be hosting Christine Cowan, an activist who recently toured Palestine with the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program. Christine has a lot to say about the deteriorating human rights conditions there. Now some housekeeping details. Question cards will be passed around for those who would like to ask questions following tonight's presentation. We will ask as many as time permits. We do ask that people maintain a civil and peaceful attitude throughout tonight's proceedings. Obviously, this is a controversial issue. We also ask that people silence their cell phones. No use of video or audio recording devices other than what we have arranged in advance is permitted. Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement enjoys growing support worldwide. Just this past weekend, the movement gained increased visibility through an important conference held at the University of Pennsylvania. The BDS initiative does not come out of nowhere. It began in response to the failure of the U.S.-backed Oslo peace process to deliver a territorial compromise and a two-state solution in the period of active negotiations from 1993 to the year 2000. During that period, when Israel pretended to be willing to trade land for peace, it actually doubled the settler population on the West Bank and built bypass roads and other infrastructure to integrate these colonies into Israel proper and to carve up and truncate what was left of native Palestine. No viable Palestinian state can be contemplated on the scattered remains. The U.S. government stood by and watched. Today, Israel rules over an unacknowledged binational country in the whole of historic Palestine, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River, but gives a monopoly of power and privilege to one ethnic group, which consists almost entirely of foreign immigrants. Israel's Arab citizens have the right to vote, but the vast majority of Arabs over whom Israel rules are not citizens, live under military occupation, and have no rights at all. In the West Bank, there are segregated roads and towns. A road there can be classified as Tzir Sterili, a sterile road, meaning one on which no Palestinian may set foot. The native population is continually being hemmed in or pushed off its land, while illegal settlements expand. There are two different legal systems for people who live side by side. And meanwhile, the whole area from the river to the sea, comprising both Israel and the occupied territories, is about to regain an Arab demographic majority, a turning point expected by 2020 at the latest. In response to this situation, which even many Israeli officials like former Attorney General Michael Ben-Yair describe as apartheid, and in reaction to Israel's continued stonewalling of meaningful diplomatic progress, an international civil society movement arose in 2005 to subject Israel to the same economic pressure which helped bring down the racist regime in South Africa. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a growing movement which includes many small grassroots organizations, just as the anti-apartheid movement did. Our speaker tonight represents one such group. Minnesota Break the Bonds was formed in 2007 and aims to pressure the state of Minnesota to divest from Israel. Our speaker tonight, Bill McGrath, is a veteran journalist, publisher, and activist at the heart of the Minnesota campaign. Born in Stillwater, Minnesota in 1952, Bill earned a BA degree in print journalism and a BS in social sciences from the University of Wisconsin at River Falls. He worked for 9 years as a reporter for a daily newspaper, then started his own publishing company, which he operated for 20 years. He currently resides in Northfield, Minnesota, home of St. Olaf College. A founding member of Northfielders for Justice in Palestine, Israel, Bill has firsthand experience of the Middle East region, having spent time in Egypt and a month observing conditions in the West Bank in 2007. Bill's message tonight, in his own words, in order to change America's attitudes toward Israel-Palestine, you need to be willing to narrow your focus, broaden your base, and create the right kind of controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Bill McGrath.
Thanks very much, Jason. Great introduction there. When I was over in the West Bank, I learned a little bit of Arabic, and I know you all know how to say thank you. Some of you probably know how to say it in Arabic. Excellent. Shukran. Can you say that? Shukran. There will be a test at the end. You can think of shukran if you want, whatever works out. I am going to tell you a little bit about my experience in the West Bank, and then I'm going to talk about Break the Bonds, the divestment effort in Minnesota. I don't consider myself to be an authority on much of anything. I certainly am not an expert on the Middle East. I do consider myself to be an expert on what I saw when I was over there. And so I try to confine my narrative to what I actually saw and what I heard over there. And so that's the title of my talk. And we could maybe dim the lights a little bit so that, there we go. Everybody see that okay? And I'm going to be referring to my homemade map over here from time to time. Everybody can see that, sort of? Fantastic. As we get started here, I'm going to send around a shekel. I'll give it to Jason here. A shekel is worth about 22 cents. Things were really cheap over there. You could get a meal, you could get the equivalent of a Big Mac for about 4 of these things. I could get a shave and a haircut for about $2. I thought of having a triple bypass while I was over there. Maybe next time. Here you have some Arabs. Now, what is an Arab? An Arab is basically a person whose native tongue is Arabic. So there's Arabs in Egypt, there's Arabs in Iraq. These fellows were in the West Bank. So it's a language thing primarily. Okay? The Arabs date back to Muhammad as far as learning that language in this particular part of the world. But these kind of people have been living there for thousands of years. We first became aware of them, I think, from the Western point of view towards the end of the Ottoman Empire. And particularly when a conflict was developing in World War I, much of that had to do with the resources of this area in general including petroleum and the Suez Canal. And so the Arabs in the Palestine area were part of the Ottoman Empire, and they were approached by a British authority named McMahon in 1915 when the war was getting started, and the Arabs were persuaded to fight on the side of the Brits and the French against the Ottoman Empire. And in return for this, the Arabs were told that they would have independence when the Ottomans were defeated. Some of you have seen Lawrence of Arabia. That's what that movie was about. So the Arabs were talked into this. Meanwhile, Britain and France in 1916 were engaged in some secret negotiations that were known as the Peace-Psycho talks, and they made an arrangement to divide up the Middle East at the end of the war. Now, the Arabs didn't know about that, and they risked their lives and did what they said they were going to do. At the time, the Jewish presence in the Palestine area was fairly minor. They were starting to move in. We're going to talk about them in a little bit. But the Arabs kind of felt that they were double-crossed by the French and the British in particular. Some more Arabs. 2 young women on a university campus in the West Bank. And I did not talk to these women, but I would imagine that the one on the left is probably a Muslim, and the one on the right is probably a Christian Arab Palestinian. Okay? Now, what is a Palestinian? We've talked about an Arab being a person whose native language is Arabic. Palestinian is a person, most of whom speak Arabic, who consider that part of the world to be their homeland. Okay? So you can have Arabs who are living in Israel. They can be citizens of Israel. They are Arabs. You can have Arabs in Palestine. They can be Muslim. They can be Christian or even other things. What is a Muslim? A Muslim is a person who follows the precepts of Islam. Most Muslims are not Arabs. You probably know this. The Iranians are technically not Arabs. The Indonesians are mostly Muslim. They're not Arabs. Okay, so there's these distinctions we need to make a little bit. What I came to believe from being over in the West Bank was that the Muslims and the Palestinian Arabs get along with each other pretty well. They befriend each other. They live next to each other. They work for each other. They generally do not intermarry, and so there's a little bit of stuff related to the role of women, which is sometimes a little bit divisive among those two. But other than that, they seem to get along pretty well. The Jews also lived in that same area, and the height of their power in this particular Palestine area probably reached its height about 3,000 years ago, when they did have King David and King Solomon and so on. They were conquered many times, as you know, and they ended up living all over the place. After the Romans took over the place, the Jews were expelled, and a lot of them ended up in Europe, but they went in other directions too. And some of them did stay in Palestine all that time. Some went into Africa, some went east, some ended up in Spain. One of the things that happened in the Middle Ages was that the Christians were forbidden to charge interest on the loaning of money. And the Jews were able to charge money on the lending of money, charge interest. And so, in time, the Jews became the bankers, the money lenders. They were the only ones that could collect interest. And that worked out fine for everybody, except when there were hard times, depressions or recessions or whatever we want to call it. And then everybody would hate the Jews because everybody owed money to the Jews. And these pogroms would arise over and over again. Inquisitions, all sorts of things against the Jews, and all sorts of wild rumors and everything else. It got really bad in the 19th century, and a lot of the Jews who were living in an area that we might call the Pale or Poland, Prussia, that area, it wasn't really Germany yet, but it was up in that area, were chased out of Western continental Europe and ended up in England. They still had the banking and so on, but they found a much better life for themselves in England and in some other countries. Other pogroms like the one in the Inquisition, in fact, sent a lot of the Jews into the Ottoman Empire, ironically, where they thrived. And in fact, many of them learned to speak Arabic as their first language. So now you've got Arabic, you've got Jewish speaking Arabic. Quite mixed up. In the 1890s, there was a spectacular espionage trial in France involving a guy named Dreyfus. And he was Jewish, he was a Frenchman, he was accused of spying on behalf of Germany. And it was a sensational trial, and eventually, after many years, he was found not guilty. But this had caused an enormous rise in anti-Semitism in France and throughout Europe. About that time, there was a journalist who came from Hungary, Theodor Herzl, to cover the trial. And he not only covered the trial, but saw how much anti-Semitism was coming about this. He was the one who said, let's get the hell out of here. Let's round up Jews and find a homeland. And that was the beginning of Zionism. So Zionism, basically, when it started out, was the desire of the Jewish people to find a homeland of their own. Not necessarily Palestine at first. They thought of some other places, but they did eventually move more towards moving towards settling in Palestine. So, again, getting back to this period of World War I, when these competing agreements were being made with the Arabs, there was the Balfour Declaration, which was made in England, and it obligated the British government to help the Jewish people, primarily the British Jewish people, to settle in Palestine. So you've got all this, the makings of a conflict coming along. And I'm going to skip through most of this just to say that in the years that followed that, there was conflict between the Jews who were growing in numbers, but it was pretty small scale, and it might have ended happily if it had not been for the Holocaust of World War II. And then you had these traumatized, organized, desperate Jews coming from Germany and other parts of Western Europe into this Palestine area, and accentuated everything and led to the formation of the Israel state in 1948. But right before that happened, there was a war between the Arabs and the Jews, and right before that, there were some massacres that occurred, perpetrated by the fanatical Jewish people against civilians, the residents, the Arab residents of the area. One of the most famous one was called Deir Yassin. It was just west of Jerusalem, and they killed a couple hundred women and children, kind of a deal, just a raid. So, right now we have about the equal number of people who are living in Israel. I think about 18% of them are Arabs, so they are Arab Israelis. In the West Bank and Gaza combined, we have about the same number, 4.5 million people, something like that. In the West Bank, which is where I was, it's about 500,000 Jewish settlers who have arrived. Most of these people nowadays who are coming there are coming from one of two places. They're either coming from the United States or they're coming from the former Soviet Union. And they're coming for different reasons. A lot of the American ones going over there are quite fanatical, religiously fanatical, and a lot of the ones that are coming from the former Soviet Union are just plain poor. And a lot of these, both types are ending up in these settlements on the West Bank. You've seen this. This is the most sacred place in the world of Judaism in Jerusalem. If you went up to the top of this wall, you'd be looking at this, which is one of the most sacred places in the world of Islam. They're that close together. They're 500 yards apart, maybe not even that. And in the back there is the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane. So it's a very charged, probably the most controversial place in the whole West Bank. Here's a settlement. They're always on hilltops. And it's kind of a Southern California lifestyle in many ways. These people usually have jobs, and the jobs may take them into Jerusalem or other parts of Israel itself. So this is an occupation, and it is illegal under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It would be as if, at the end of World War II, if the United States had taken the equivalent of maybe 15 million Americans and had them come and take land in Germany and help them stay there. It's a little bit like that. So they have a pretty good life. Palestine is basically a desert. So when you see green grass, you know that somebody has the money to get water. Water is extremely scarce. These are pictures in a settlement. Now, if we contrast that with how the Palestinians are living, in the foreground we have a Palestinian city. And you'll notice up on the top of the screen here, there's the settlement. There's the road coming across this bridge going into Israel itself. Now, you can only go on that road if you've got a yellow license plate. And you can only have a yellow license plate if it's issued by Israel. So the Palestinians are not allowed on that road. Instead, the Palestinians have roads like this, and notice how dry it is here. It's basically a desert, most of it. And if you refer to my homemade map over here in the corner, if everybody can see this here, I was living down here near Bethlehem, and it was about 5 miles to Jerusalem. Very difficult to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem because of the wall. We're going to talk about the wall a little bit later on, but if you can just orient yourself to this map, here is Israel itself, here's the West Bank. The green line is the international line that was set up in 1948. The red line is the wall. Because of the wall and some other factors, such as checkpoints, you cannot go from Bethlehem to Ramallah. You could 25 years ago. So it's kind of like if you're in Iowa City and you want to go to Davenport, but you have to go through Cedar Rapids to get there. I mean, it's almost that ridiculous. Not as many miles as this, but it's way out of the way. It takes a long time. And plus, as you're doing this, you encounter checkpoints. I went through, I think, 14 checkpoints while I was over there, and nothing bad happened to me. I had the proper paperwork and everything, but I saw people being delayed and detained and sent back. Our own tour bus could not go through. The driver was not allowed to go through. We had to rent 5 taxis to continue our trip. So it's a big hassle. They're all over the place. The wall itself is following that green line. I'm sorry, the red line here. It separates Palestinian people from each other. It separates them from their agricultural land. Now, it has cut down on suicide bombers, and that was ostensibly why the wall was built. They say it was to keep out terrorists. A lot of people would consider it to be just a land grab, a way for Israel to take more land. So maybe it's both. We'll leave it at that for right now. This was the worst place that I visited. It was down in Hebron, if you can see right here, town of about 150,000 people, right in the middle of the shopping district. The Israeli Jewish fanatical settlers have set up a settlement in a high-rise building, and they are guarded by, it's like 400 settlers guarded by 5,000 troops. It's just a ridiculous situation. There's police all over and soldiers all over. And what we're looking at here, we're down in the street where the Palestinians try to conduct their business. We're looking straight up, and this is a chain-link fence to catch all the garbage that the settlers throw down onto the Palestinians. And what they're throwing down is bricks and pipes and dirty diapers and tampons, bags of urine. It's just a whole stretch of this fence that caught my attention. It's a very tense place there. Nothing bad happened to me while I was there. In fact, I had a great time in the West Bank in general. But this is the kind of thing that is being done in certain places. Fairly common sight. This was in one of the refugee camps. Bullet holes. Don't know what happened there exactly. But quite often, the Israeli military will move in the middle of the night, and they're looking for one bad guy, and somebody will start throwing rocks at them, and they start shooting, and somebody might have died here. I just don't know the whole story, but I saw this in a lot of places. Another thing you see is the martyr posters. And I don't know much about this guy here except that he's dead. He is almost certainly a Muslim Palestinian. This is almost certainly his father here. He might have been a suicide bomber. He might have been shot and killed by Israel. But you see this a lot on the walls, particularly in the refugee camps. So the Palestinian people have put up with this stuff, and they have tried various ways of turning it around. They have tried rising up with their intifadas. There's been 2 of those. What they currently are doing is nonviolent Martin Luther King, Gandhi type resistance. And this here is in a town, you can see Ramallah right here. This is a village over here. And of course, the story here is that the wall came along very close to this village and cut off the people from their agricultural land. So every Friday, about 100 people gather in the village, and this includes Palestinians, Europeans, Americans, Jews, including Israeli Jews, and they all march nonviolently about half a mile towards the wall, and this is what they run into. Every Friday this happens. And this guy right here, this soldier, has a bullhorn. And what he's saying, I could not understand what he was saying. It might have been Hebrew, but I was told that what he was saying is, you are on Israeli military property and you have 1 minute to get off. And right when he says that, you notice that a minute later, these things start flying over your head, and those are tear gas canisters. And it's what they call CS gas. It's very, very nasty stuff. It burns your eyes and your nose and your skin, and you want to get away from it. But these things are going over your head, so you've got to walk through it, even if you're trying to escape. So some people react to the gas and are running to get away. Now, some people choose to not run away. They just stay where they are. And then the Israeli soldiers begin shooting what they call rubber bullets. And I did not get hit by a rubber bullet. I'm glad I didn't. But I'm told that it's about like if I had a slingshot and I put a big marble in it and I shot poor Jason right here. If I hit him just right, I could kill him, and that has happened. Or I could break his rib or anything. So it's a very bad thing to have happen to you. And I did see people being taken away on stretchers. I don't know if they were overcome by gas or they'd been hit with a rubber bullet. So these are the kind of things that I saw over there, in addition to having a lot of fun. And everybody wants peace. This is the symbol of peace, the olive branch. And so here we are in America, and you guys know a lot about all this, maybe more than I do. But the point is, as we try to do something about it, well, we can pray. We can pray for peace in the Middle East. We can write to our congressmen. We can make signs and stand on the street corner. There's a lot of things we can do. Do they do any good? I think they do some good. They do some good for us, and it's certainly a great way to meet nice people. But does it have an effect? We can't be sure of that because it's so easy for the powers to ignore us. They can accept our letter and smile and put it in the file, and that's it. A minute later, they're thinking about something else. So a group of people in the Twin Cities a couple years ago decided to ratchet things up a little more and actually try to put pressure on people and make them do something. The story goes that Minnesota Break the Bonds. I'll have to put on my Superman shirt here. I feel empowered just putting it on. There we go. This is our symbol. It says divest. Minnesota Break the Bonds. The story goes that a Jewish lesbian woman was giving a Jewish man a ride to the airport in Minneapolis, and the two of them got talking about how we should get this divestment thing going. And they did the research to find out that the state of Minnesota, over the last 20 years, has invested about $18 million in the government of Israel. Now, this is money, taxpayer money, that came from retirement pensions of public employees, state workers. Okay? So, this is the art part of the program. Here you got your pig, okay? There's money in there, taxpayer money. $18 million of it is going to the government of Israel. And they use this for what they call infrastructure in the West Bank. Okay? That's as far as they'll tell us. But we know that the money is being used to pay for those settler roads that only the Jewish Israeli settlers can use. It's being used to build the wall. It's being used to set up surveillance systems. And in order to do something about this, the group, Minnesota Break the Bonds, first approached the state legislators. Our second slide. You can compliment me later on the art. But this is what the state capitol sort of looks like. Is it upside down? No, it's okay. Okay. We have golden horses on our capitol. They're very famous. All the little kids know about these golden horses here. So the way that it works is that There is something called the State Board of Investment, and you guys would have one down here too. We know that there are 23 states where the state government has purchased Israel bonds, and Iowa is not one of them. There also are a lot of municipalities that have purchased Israeli bonds. And I don't know if Iowa City or Des Moines or if there's any cities in your state that may have bought them. But the similarity is that there's always going to be a very small group of people who make these investment decisions. And what we have in Minnesota is called the State Board of Investment. Now, the people who are on that board, in our particular case, is the governor, the attorney general, the treasurer, and the secretary of state. Those four make up the decision-making body as far as deciding what to do with this retirement money. And it's $54 billion that they have to work with. So the $18 million that they have in Israel bond is negligible. But the group has decided to put pressure on the individual legislators because that is a group that the State Board of Investment pays attention to. Okay? The final slide. Is that upside down? Okay. So we have been involved for really 2 years in trying to influence the brains of the legislators.
They're not that big.
They're not that big, no. And we have found the response to be a wide variety. There's quite a few Jewish legislators. There's quite a few Christian Zionist people in positions of power. And then there are people who are very receptive to what we're trying to do. But they tell us, well, this is not a right time to do it because I'm involved in this education bill, or I'm involved in transportation right now, or something like that. So we've been getting this kind of a runaround, and they tell us, it just goes directly to the State Board of Investment, those four people. And so we did do that. And they told us to go to the legislators. So we chased our tail for a while. About a year ago, our group, Minnesota Break the Bonds, gained a new member who is a very, very dedicated and committed attorney. And he saw the potential for a lawsuit. So currently we are doing both. We are continuing to work on the minds of the legislators, but we also have introduced a lawsuit. Now, the way the lawsuit works is that Minnesota law stipulates how pension funds can be invested. Okay, so there are some laws on this, and we have become fairly familiar with it. Not so much me, but our group has become very familiar with it. If you read this law, it doesn't mention Israel anyplace. And yet Israel is the only country that the state of Minnesota has invested in. It is the only country where we have gone and bought bonds from that government. Okay? Meanwhile, Minnesota state law goes on and on and on about Canada, how we could invest money in the government of Canada, how that money has to be paid back. It's all spelled out as far as Canada goes. Nothing about Israel. So one of the ways that we're looking at this lawsuit, and we're trying to persuade a judge to look at it this way, is that the state law is so vague as to who you can invest in, that if you're going to invest in Israel, you might as well invest in North Korea. They are both the same under the law. You could find whatever country you want to name, Myanmar or whatever, whoever is guilty of human rights abuses, and sink your money into those. Israel is on the same footing as all of those. So that's one argument that we're following. Another one is that to invest money in the government of Israel is illegal under international law because Minnesota state law says that you cannot invest money in entities that are guilty of other laws, of committing other laws. And so we cite the Fourth Geneva Convention, Section 49, which is the phrase that says an occupying country cannot move its own citizens into an occupied territory, which Israel has been doing since 1967. March 5th is our next appearance in court, Federal District Court in Minnesota, and the judge is being pressured, as you might imagine, by the other side to dismiss the case. So on March 5th, we're going to find out if the judge dismisses the case. If the judge does that, we are going to appeal it. We have several attorneys working on it pro bono, and we're not giving up at all. We feel that if we can win in court, it'll bring a lot of these other legislators and decision makers more on our side. So we're using both of the approaches. I'd like to open it up at this point to questions. Written, however you prefer to do it.
We have to request.
Sure.
Anybody else have it?
I would also call attention to that display back there with the keffiyeh on it. There's a chart that kind of explains in pictures what Minnesota Break the Bonds is all about. There's some literature on those two chairs, and I encourage you to take that. Includes our website. Questions are welcome, or just comments too. A question?
Does your group have standing as public employees or just as taxpayers to bring this suit? Did it present a problem to get legal standing?
It's a great question. We had to find people who would be listed in the court case. And so we found a variety of people. Some of them are public employees of the state who feel that they have been damaged by this situation. We have some Palestinian people who live in Minnesota who feel they have been damaged by it. We even have some people in the West Bank who have signed on as plaintiffs, co-plaintiffs in this suit. Does that answer your question? That is legal standing. That's very important.
Do you have any suggestions for persuading entities such as churches, universities, to divest from TIAA-CREF, which invests in Israel?
I'm afraid that I have to say that I do not know very much about that. It seems like a very good thing to pursue. We are focused only on this state, Minnesota state government investing pension funds. But I think TIAA-CREF would be very appropriate, especially in Iowa City.
Does your group support divestment from Israel bonds only or other forms of investment?
Could you read that again, or could I see it?
Does your group support divestment only from Israel bonds or also other forms of investment?
we are focused entirely on the $18 million that the state of Minnesota has invested in the government of Israel. I would like to explain a little bit about some other divestments that have occurred in the state of Minnesota involving state government. There have been 3 other countries in the last 25 years in which Minnesota has had investments and they were persuaded to divest: South Africa, Sudan, and Iran. But in all 3 cases, the state of Minnesota had investments in companies that were doing business with those governments. Okay? We were not dealing directly with the governments. We were dealing with these companies. And so we, or not me, but the state of Minnesota was persuaded by citizen groups, pretty much, to divest from the companies that were doing business. That's the only history of any of this that I have been aware of. And I just wanted to explain a little more. I don't know if I'd answer that question. Does it kind of answer the question? Let me know if it doesn't. The State Board of Investment takes the position that they are only interested in what they consider to be what they call their fiduciary responsibility, which is making money for the people that they are responsible to. So they will say things like, well, we don't involve matters of morality or ethics or anything like that in how we invest our money. We look at return. And the Israel bonds are bringing in about 5%. It's a little bit more on some. There's several different investments, but it totals to $18 million. Some are a little bit less than 5. Minnesota has money invested in casinos, Las Vegas casinos, Walmart, the Pfizer pharmacy company that makes Viagra. They seem to know where the market is and they invest in it. So talking to them about what's right and wrong hasn't gotten too far thus far, but we're going to use that, and certainly that'll resonate with a lot of the people of Minnesota and hopefully the legislators too, so we can use both approaches.
Have you heard of the divestment work on Caterpillar Corporation, which builds the bulldozers that destroy Palestinian homes?
I certainly have heard of divestment activity against Caterpillar, and Motorola is another one. Several of these companies. You were mentioning another one at dinner. What? Hewlett-Packard, yeah. And there's others too. Now this would be, I think this would be harder because there's no public accountability, really. You can't go to legislators, you can't put it on the ballot for people to vote on or anything like that. It's, either you're a shareholder in Caterpillar or you're not. You can stand there with your sign at the entrance and stuff like that, but I'm not. Our group is not working on that kind of stuff, at least right now. There are things. This Ahava is a cosmetic company that gets a lot of its raw materials from the Dead Sea, and they pass it off as being an Israeli product, but it's really in the Palestinian territory. So there's people working on that one.
People who support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement have sparked a lot of debate in our country. Many people who oppose the movement say that it unfairly singles out Israel when you can look even in the area, even in the region of Israel, and see some pretty massive human rights abuses. On the other hand, defenders of the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanction make two arguments. One is that as Americans, we have a special responsibility both for abuses that occur in our own country and those that occur in close allies, and especially Israel, with which we have a declared special relationship. And the second argument would be that, as in the case of South Africa, it didn't necessarily massacre people every day, but it had a system of racial domination, and it was important to make a statement just against that, and that was a reason for putting some focus on South Africa, and that a similar situation exists in Palestine, which is again going to become an Arab majority country, and it will be under strict minority rule if President Tanz continue. You just have a comment about this controversy?
It would seem that our relationship with Israel is unlike our relationship with any other country for a couple of reasons. First of all, the amount of money that we give them. We also give them that money up front at the beginning of each year, whereas other foreign aid goes out throughout the year. Israel wants it all at once, and they get it all at once, and that's that. In our activity regarding the United Nations, many votes come up with Israel and the United States virtually against the rest of the world. And that kind of tells you something right there. As far as the global consciousness in what's going on in that part of the world is very much at odds with our foreign policy and our national policy. So it really seems like we are bending over backwards to help a pariah nation. And I think the rest of the world has known this for some time, and I like to think that it's catching on that, we are guilty of that here too. Uh-oh. Special effects.
Do you think Americans or Minnesotans would be more empathetic to the daily lives of Palestinians if they had to live there for one day?
I think that if they lived there for an hour and they did the right kind of stuff, their eyes would be open and they would have to be affected permanently by it. There are these tours that go over to what is known as the Holy Land, and I have not participated in the wide variety that's available, but I think some of them give such a pro-Israel spin that I don't even know that it's worth going into the West Bank if you're going to be told how dangerous the Palestinians are at every turn. I spent time in Bethlehem, which is the most Christian part of the West Bank. These are Christian Arabs, and the tourism there is the most important industry. So these big tour buses will pull up, and they will be Italians or Americans or whatever they are, and I have seen people, the bus stops and the people get out and they run to the Church of the Nativity, which is the main tourist attraction in Bethlehem, because they're terrified. So I don't think that those people come back to the United States with a real balanced view of what's going on over there. You've got to get out and talk to people, walk the streets all by yourself. I did it all the time. I had no trouble in the whole month that I was there, and I would really recommend that people consider going over there. I went through a program that's called Shiraz, and I'd be happy to tell you about that. You live with an Arab family. so on.
Can you talk about how your views on Israel may have evolved, and how did you get interested in this issue?
When I was in high school, I read Exodus. Maybe some of you read Leon Uris' book, and this coincided with pretty much the 1967 war, which was a glorious triumph for Israel, and I had great admiration for them. And then I became skeptical about United States foreign policy in Vietnam and other things like that. So when 9/11 happened, we started a group in our town, much like what you guys have here, of learning more about what's really going on in the world and so on. And we started bringing in speakers. Some of the speakers we brought in were people who had been in the West Bank or Gaza. And that made me start wondering whether I was getting good information. So I started reading, and we started bringing in movies and more speakers, and I subscribed to this magazine called The Washington Report, if you know what that is. And gradually, I just became aware that this is a very great injustice that we are perpetrating. And, you know, a lot of times the Zionists will tell us, you know, well, look what you did to the Indians, you know, and all this kind of stuff. But and that was terrible. I will never, ever try to defend what we did to the Native American people. But at least we were not getting money from some foreign government to do this stuff. And also, we didn't have the Geneva Convention 150 years ago. I mean, we were not violating international law when we were killing Indians. It was a terrible thing to do. We were not, you know. So that's. Did I answer your question? I just make a speech and I don't answer the question. In the context of this group that we had, we were skeptical of the war on terrorism, and we became aware of what was going on in Palestine. And then I went to a divestment event in Minneapolis in 2007. And I got talking to a person there, and she said, well, you should go over there, and here's how you can do it. And she told me about this exact program that I just mentioned called Shiraz. And since it was about the time that I was I'm kind of semi-retired. And right about the time I decided to become semi-retired, I found this mission, you know, this cause, and I've been very wrapped up in it ever since, and a lot of other people that I know are equally or more committed to it.
Any others? When you say Washington Report, you're referring to Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. How balanced have you found American media on the Israel-Palestine issue?
The news that I get in regards to the Middle East consists, honestly, I glance through the New York Times every day, and I detect a fair amount of bias in the way that they will report such things as the cast-led invasion of Gaza. This feeling of conflicted information, cognitive dissonance, I think some people call it. I find them to have a vested interest in it, the New York Times specifically. One of their main writers, Ethan Bronner, has a son in the Israeli army right now. He should not be covering that part of the world, I don't think. The Washington Report does not purport to be fair and balanced or anything. You know, it's a pro-Palestinian publication as far as I can tell, and not just Palestinian, because it covers a lot of other conflicts going on in that general part of the world. But I have found that to be quite reliable when measured against people that I know and trust and who have been over there or go over many times. I know one woman that's been there 22 times. So I go by that stuff. And I'm quite skeptical of, and I don't even watch television. As far as public radio goes, that's better, I think, than the New York Times. But I still think that there's some very selective approach to what's important.
There's two questions I can kind of combine. Tell us about the program you were with in Palestine. How successful would you say it was in its efforts?
I arrived over there and went to a town that's called Bet Sahur, which is a relatively affluent and relatively Christian and relatively educated part of the West Bank. It's right next to Bethlehem. And I lived with an Arab family there. They were involved, the father was involved in wood carving, olive wood carving. The mother had been a school teacher, and those people were in their 60s, I would say. Their son was the leader of the whole program. His name is George Rishmawi. And so there were about a dozen of us, some Americans, some from Britain, some from Germany, basically, but there were other people that kind of came and went from other countries too. And we were all living with Arab families. We were all studying some Arabic language in the morning at Bethlehem University, and in the afternoon we all were expected to go out and do some kind of work with a local community organization. My job was with a news bureau that is called the International Middle East Media Center, and it was an amazing place. Quite small, but they had Arab, Palestinian reporters out in all parts. I mean, from Jenin to Khan Younis in Gaza, and sending in articles, eyewitness accounts of what they were seeing, things we never hear about here. I mean, you know, several people being killed in a day, you know, and that's news over there, and it's not at all news here. My job was to, these articles would be written in Arabic, and they would come to this woman sitting next to me who was a Palestinian Christian Arab woman, and she would translate it into English, and then she'd give it to me, and I would translate it into American. Kind of clean it up a little bit and give it a headline. And I also read the news over the radio station sometimes, and just a fascinating place, though. Then at night, we would have speakers. We would meet with different people. We would have movies. And on weekends, I went into every one of those places that are listed there and was able to walk around with my camera and talk to people as best I could. And it wasn't that much money. It was the whole thing cost me $3,200, including the airfare. So that's pretty good, you know, and it helps the people over there. And I just felt very close to what it's like, what it feels like to be a Palestinian. That's, I guess, the best way I would describe the value of it. We were told to go forth and spread the news of what it's like. And in fact, right now we're trying to raise some money to send some people. This is another organization I belong to, but we're raising money to send more people over to participate in that same program, the Shiraz Center. You have another question there?
Yeah. Obama recently declared that his administration will be acting in, quote, lockstep, unquote, with Israel on military action against Iran. Does this position have overwhelming support in the U.S.? And if not, is it possible to generate much support? Or if so, is it possible to generate much support for a divestment campaign?
There are two reasons why I personally am so committed to this Palestine-Israel situation. And one of them has to do with what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. But the other reason is this kind of stuff. Israel and Zionists and AIPAC and all these lobbies seem to be behind nefarious things. The war in Iraq, the war in Iran, maybe even the war in Afghanistan. Maybe the stuff that's happening in Egypt, in Libya, and Yemen, and maybe that's who's calling the shots on all of it. I would not rule that out. So where do you start? It seems like if you say nice things about Israel, and there are nice things about Israel, but if you just say nice things about Israel, the Zionists win every time. And if you don't say anything about Israel, the Zionists always win. But if you say bad things about Israel, then the Zionists rise up on their hind legs and they accuse you of being anti-Semitic, and maybe a controversy can arise. And if there's a controversy, maybe there's going to be some education. It's probably not going to happen otherwise. We probably got to get controversial in order to get the American people to understand what is going on. It's not the first time it's happened.
Okay, I think we're at the end of our questions. I want to thank Bill for coming down and all of you for coming out. Thank you very much.
Who can remember how to say thank you? Can everybody remember that? Good. Hey, and where's my shekel, by the way? What kind of a group is this? Oh, look at Jason's got it. Honest man. Thank you so much for being here. Stick around if you can.